Thank you. Sorry, that thing just popped up. So thank you so much, Toni, for joining us today and taking the time to answer our interview questions and helping us celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. Day here at CarGuru's.
It's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. If you want to, you can share just a little bit about yourself and then we'll jump into the interview questions.
Sure. Well, I am currently the CEO of Sportsmen's Tennis and Enrichment Center in Dorchester. I've been there for 12 and a half years. Sportsmen's is the oldest indoor nonprofit tennis club that was built by and for the African American community back in 1961. And above and beyond the tennis, we provide academic support and social and emotional programs for youth and a real gathering point and a place for healthy physical activity for adults. We are welcoming to the entire community, and I've really enjoyed my tenure here at Sportsmen's.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Toni, for your introduction. So we're going to start off with a few questions that we have for you. So the first one is, throughout your career, you have worked with the Partnership of Excellence in Jewish Education, Jane Doe, Inc., One Family, and are currently the CEO of Sportsman Tennis Club. What inspires you to work for and found organizations that are in service to others?
Well, before all of that began, I had spent almost 20 years in the corporate sector. I was a licensed customs broker and I was working in importing and exporting. And the last company that I worked for asked me to join a board of directors, to join the board of directors of Jane Doe, Inc. And it was my first time really being behind the scenes of a nonprofit organization. I had served in my church and I had done some other volunteer work, but this was the first time I really got to see kind of, how the sausage is made, so to speak, in a nonprofit organization. And it helped me realize the need for the same types of corporate strengths and functionality in a nonprofit organization, but with an entirely different purpose. And for me, transitioning to a mission-driven organization instead of a profit-driven organization was an immediate fit. It made me feel as though my life had more purpose. It made me feel more connected and more grounded to the work that I was doing. And I found that with each position that I took, I got closer and closer to the actual beneficiaries of the work that we were doing. So with Jane Doe, Inc., that's a statewide coalition of domestic violence and rape crisis centers. But as a statewide coalition, it really wasn't, you weren't that connected to the actual beneficiaries of your work. And then when I went to work for One Family, Inc., we were actually working with homeless families, families that were in shelter or families that were at risk of being in shelter. And so it made it even that much easier to put an actual name and an actual face with the issue that you were trying to address and the people that you were trying to help. Partnership for Excellence in Jewish Education, again, it's a faith-based organization, and my faith is very important to me. And it didn't matter to me that this was a Jewish organization, that their faith is somewhat different than mine. It was still an organization that was trying to facilitate faith-based education for children. And it was the same process of me trying to bring my sort of corporate level skills into a nonprofit organization. So coming to Sportsmen's has really been a blend for me. We're certainly still a nonprofit. We're very mission driven. I love the fact that I get to watch these kids grow up right in front of me. They become these phenomenal tennis players and they become learners for life. They develop a thirst for education. They want to take their place in society. And yet at the same time, we are running a tennis facility. So all of the elements of running a business, along with the nonprofit mission-driven work and getting to see these kids and get to know these families, it's really been a blessing to me to have this kind of work.
Thank you so much. I'm very familiar with the Sportsman Tennis Club. I do have a few people that actually used to go there, and they're doing so well. Some of them are doctors now, so I know it was very beneficial to the community. So thank you so much. I have one more question. You have spent almost 13 years with the Sportsman's Tennis Club. What would you describe the work of the club in that time and your goals moving forward? What keeps you motivated?
Well, the club was formed with the belief that tennis could be used to open up doors of opportunity and that academic support had to go hand in hand with that. And so from the time that I came on, we really began to formalize that process of being able to impact youth education. And we very quickly realized that working with kids at a younger age gave us a better ability to develop those foundational skills that were going to be important to them as they moved through life. And then we realized that the same way that the founders realized education was so crucial to the kids that we were serving, we began to see the other needs that were just as important for the kids in our community. So that's how we began to develop additional partnerships. We have a strong partnership with the Boston Police in a program called Volley Against Violence that really helps kids understand what the role of the police is in the community, what the role of a citizen is in the community. How do we work together to have a safe and just and fair society? How do you communicate? And it helps the police remember how to communicate with children, how to interact with children, to not see them as the victim of a crime or the perpetrator of a crime, but to see them as a child and figure out how best to connect with them. We have a partnership with Children's Services of Roxbury to help us work with kids that have experienced trauma or families that have dealt with, different types of trauma or insecurities, or even just dealing with a child who learns differently, a child who's on the spectrum. We have great tennis pros, but they don't necessarily know how to work with a child who has witnessed domestic violence or who communicates differently. So we began to realize that if we want these kids to use tennis as a vehicle to get into college, to get perhaps a scholarship, at the very least to get on the club team and have some community there that helps them get through those 4 years, that they will take tennis into their adult lives and have a healthy, active, physical life as adults. They have to survive the neighborhood. They have to be able to manage themselves. When they get to college, they have to get up on time on their own, be where they're supposed to be, finish their homework. So we needed to help them build all of those self-management skills that are just as important as the actual skill inventories that you get when you're studying in an after-school program. So we developed programs to help them with public speaking and healthy relationships and developing self-esteem. We worked with them on money management and career exploration. So the job is so rich. No one day is the same as any other. Not every day is fun. I can certainly acknowledge that. And, raising money is always a challenge. But when you can see the results, when you have a child who's very shy and they eventually are able to speak at our gala in front of 700 people, you really begin to realize that you're helping these kids in a way that's going to stay with them for the rest of their lives. And that's very meaningful.
Thank you again. I think Nick is taking over.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I just want to echo, not every day will be fun is such a such a true mantra to keep in mind. So thank you again, Toni, for taking the time. My first question is, your work is focused on young people, on building leaders through sport. What makes this an effective form of outreach for building leaders?
Well, studies have shown that ongoing physical activity has huge benefits for young people. It builds their cognitive skills. It helps them with decision making. Even some of the kids who may be having trouble just sitting still in a classroom that need to burn off some energy. I think that sometimes we get so focused on one specific area that we forget that we're all whole people and every element of our lives has to be addressed. And that's even more important with kids. We can't spend 6 or 8 hours a day focused purely on academics. When you take away music, when you take away arts, when you take away sports, you take away a portion of that child's growth and they all blend in together. So, I think for a time when we start to get into, educational testing and making sure that kids are achieving certain academic levels, and we get so focused on that and we forget about the other elements of that child's life, at some point we have to bring that back into balance. And so, we work on the concept that people have heard about of a growth mindset. We want kids to understand that if they put their effort in, they will get stronger, they will get better at what they're doing. And so in tennis, we can help them understand that very clearly. You didn't have your forehand mastered and now look at how well you're doing with that. Let's move on to something else. And then we want to take that same logic, that same comfort into the classroom or into their relationships. How did you approach this problem? Well, you broke it down into several steps. You broke your serve down into 4 or 5 different motions. We want you to break this algebra problem down into 4 or 5 different different steps and then master it the same way that you did that. You have to control your emotions on the court. You can't get angry because then you're not ready for the next point. Well, if you're at home and something's not going right, you can't just get angry because then you're not prepared to deal with it. So the lessons that we teach on the court help us teach that same child in other settings. And in the opposite direction, the self-talk we hear from that child on the court helps us understand what they say to themselves when they perceive that they've made a mistake. And it helps us understand how to build that child up when they are falling down, because we now have a little bit of a window into their thinking about what made them do something well and what made them do something that didn't come out the way they had hoped that it would.
Great, great advice there for sure. I did have one follow-up question.
Sure.
So, in my life, I've seen tennis become a more racially diverse sport. However, it does remain somewhat of a, let's call it a white sport. But my question is more so, what do people like the Serena sisters, Naomi Osaka, and Sloane Stephens, like what impact does people like that and their success have on these communities?
I think in every element of our lives, we need to see people who look like us, that are successful, that are happy with their lives. So whether that is turning on the news and seeing a Black anchor, or going to go to your doctor's appointment and your doctor is Latina or Asian or whatever the case may be, we need to understand that we have a robust society, and we need to be represented in all elements of society. So I always try to answer that way because I don't want the focus to simply be on professional sports. I don't want us to say, oh, you can look at this sport or that sport. Kids need to say, if I think I can be good at something, it's helpful to me to see that somebody else who looks like me, or who grew up in the same neighborhood that I did, or who had the same circumstances that I did, they invested in themselves and they got to where I'd like to get to. So for me, that's the measure of having, whether it's someone like Naomi Osaka or Frances Tiafoe that are younger and sort of coming up in that, or having someone like Serena or Venus, who really have paved the way and have let us see, you can do this year after year. You can take care of yourself and do this for the long run, and do it for the next generation, do it for people that are coming behind you. To me, I think that's where the messaging is there.
Thank you. Sorry, I did misspeak earlier. I said Serena sisters. I did mean the Williams sisters, but thank
That's
you
okay.
for knowing who I meant.
No worries. Everybody knew who you meant.
Switching gears, from the work that you do into, obviously the person that we're celebrating, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. He is an iconic figure of civil rights and racial justice. While his movement has helped shape the future of America and the world, what does he mean to you personally?
I think for me, I tend to sort of think very small when it comes to the club and the community, and trying to help people understand sort of what can they impact. We start small and you make a difference there, and then from that you can sort of build and make a difference in the broader community. So if we were having our traditional Martin Luther King Day program on Monday, typically I would speak about some element of beloved community, which was important to Dr. King. He talked about building community. He talked about all of us having a responsibility for that. He talked about us not tolerating things like poverty and homelessness and hunger. And so when we talk to the kids, we say, you can define community however you like to. Your community is your house. Your community is your street. Your community is your town. It's your state. It's your country. Or it's everybody who fits into a certain, however you characterize yourself, that's the community. So how do you build a beloved community among those people? What do you have to do in your household for it to feel like the beloved community that Dr. King envisioned? What do you have to do in your community with the people who live on your street or the people who live 2 streets over? What does it mean if there's this concept of beloved community, and yet outside my door, there are people that are fighting with each other just because you live on this street and I live on that street, or you stepped on my shoe, so now I'm angry at you. How does that square with this broader concept of beloved community? Because it's hard to try to get a child to understand world peace or understand what's happening in Washington, D.C. when there's chaos outside their door. So I think for us, we try to bring it back to, what was he actually trying to get to? He was trying to get to a point where there was a community of people who loved each other and who understood that my well-being is not improved because you're suffering, and that your suffering should have an impact on my well-being. I should feel as though we are one community, and therefore I cannot overlook the fact that you don't have enough to eat. So we try to bring it back to that standpoint. And we go from the prospect of, yes, we want you to do all the things you need to do to set yourself up in life so that you can be a contributing member of society. And at the same time, we want you to understand what your role is as a member of that society, both to create beloved community and to be a part of that as you grow older.
Thank you very much. Those are my two questions. I believe, Victoria, I'm handing off to you for the remainder.
Yes. I love that, beloved community. That's I've never heard that term before, but it's so resonant. Like it's very beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
The question I have here is, so last summer, 2020, the Black Lives Movement was catapulted into the national stage after the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Many were inspired to protest and make good trouble, in the words of the late John Lewis. How did this impact you, and how did this impact your work?
So personally, I run an organization, but I'm a parent, I'm a grandparent, and frankly, it was terrifying. It was at the same time that you want to raise your voice and you want your child to go out and raise their voices, you also want them to be safe and to do so in such a way that is smart and is not going to put anyone in danger, including themselves. And you don't want to raise somebody who is afraid to raise their voice or doesn't know when they need to speak up. So this summer was horrible. It was terrifying to stand back and to have all this happen at the same time as the pandemic, when you have to be very careful about your proximity to others. So you take everything as a teachable moment. And so in all of our programs, we always talk about social justice, and we always talk about what it means to respectfully make your voice heard. So this reminded us of the need to make sure that in everything we do, we are helping our kids be proud of who they are, know who they are, and know how to respectfully stand up for themselves, speak for themselves, and how to be in partnership, how to be a part of a movement. What exactly is a movement? So it did allow us to step back and say, okay, we know we do these things, but maybe sometimes things get a little rote. You get so used to developing or delivering the same curriculum, and then something reminds you that you need to shake things up a little bit. So we always have to remind ourselves that no matter how young kids are, they are seeing things in social media, they're seeing things on the news. I can't envision a time, perhaps in the 60s, but I can't envision a time when most people actually had the ability to watch somebody lose their life on live television, to watch somebody go from walking around and talking to being prone on the ground for 8 minutes and then coming to a point of losing their life. So that imagery, for me, I'm almost 60, but if somebody 50 years younger than me saw that, what do you do with that? What do you do with that, with the energy and the emotion that it stirs up inside of you? And if you're in your teens and you're already feeling like people don't understand you, and then you see that and you realize that can happen, that could have been me. I think we have to be prepared to step back and listen to what people are saying and what they're feeling, and then figure out how to help them channel that energy in a way that's positive for them and positive for us as a society. So I don't have one single answer to that. I think it was a wake-up call for those of us who do this kind of work to remember that this issue is multifaceted. You have to be ready to listen. You can't be ready to simply deliver the same curriculum that you've been delivering for the last X number of years, because things have changed. There's a new awakening on all sides of the equation, and we really have to listen and respond.
Absolutely. Completely agree. And the last question we have is, so last week there was an unprecedented attack on our nation's capital and our government representatives. This has left many people feeling hopeless and cynical around a racially equitable America. How do you continue to inspire this work in your organization?
There are no words for what happened last week, except to say that I would rather have it in my face than hidden. So as painful as it was to watch that last week, now we have proof. We're not imagining this. We are not able to say, oh, you can't try to argue this away or explain it away or say that it was something that it wasn't. We saw peaceful protesters get tear gassed, and we saw anarchists get politely escorted out of the Capitol after they broke into the White House and went searching for people to harm. And so anybody who thought that perhaps this was all exaggerated, that's gone. So as hard as it was to watch, we have to recognize that there was a message here. And now the question is, how are people going to respond? And we're trying to figure that out as a country. I think as an organization, again, we have to give young people the opportunity to speak and be heard and tell us what they think they saw before we try to help them understand what we think they saw. And so I think that it's an important time to say, there are ways of making your voice heard, and we talked about that this summer, and there are ways of not making yourself heard. But when you see this, you have to understand exactly what it is that you're seeing. This was hatred. This was not a protest movement. This was hatred. This was violence. And we need to call things as they are.
Absolutely.
I was just going to say, I had never thought of that, but as you mentioned, finding out what they saw and not what you think they saw, I think that's very powerful. I was just going to say, if we have a couple moments, I did have one follow-up question, but I just want to say again, thank you so much for your time and your words. The one follow-up question I have is, CarGuru's, like many organizations, face issues in trying to drive diversity, especially as we get into the higher levels of management, right? But what do you say to young African American professionals that are looking to advance their career and looking to rise when sometimes it may feel like it's an insurmountable mountain? I not only need to prove myself, but I need to overcome a system that is set against me. What do you say to those folks?
Once again, I would say you're probably not imagining it. So first of all, own it, understand exactly what it is that you're dealing with. Take every opportunity for growth. Don't feel angry that you have to work harder. Just acknowledge that you have to work harder, do the work, because at the end of the day, you have the knowledge that you gained and nobody can take it away from you. So you may have had to learn 20 verses of something to get to a point that somebody else would have had to learn 10 verses and get there. But at the end of the day, you both ended up at the same place, but you have gotten twice as much knowledge in your system that you own, that you have, that you can take with you wherever you go. So I've never shied away from the need to do more to prove myself, because I know what I have inside of me. So I think what we have to teach our young folks is, yes, unfortunately, you're going to have to work harder. Try your hardest not to let it make you angry or bitter. Recognize it, see what it is, and then put yourself in a position to change that for the people who come behind you. I think that's the most important part, is that if you can get yourself to the place at the table where you're helping to impact these decisions, that's where the change comes. But first you've got to get there. And unfortunately, that sometimes does mean that you have to prove yourself over and over again, and you just have to buckle down and do it. At the end of the day, success is what it is. People can try and say that you're not capable of this, you're not capable of that, but when you perform, they have no choice but recognize it.
Absolutely. I did want to follow up and just ask how CarGuru's as a company could support the Sportsmen Tennis Club and the communities it serves. Would love to be more involved.
Well, thank you for that. Sportsmen's as a nonprofit, like all nonprofits, we're constantly fundraising and we're constantly trying to build partnerships. So I'm sure we could have a conversation about ways of making your constituents know who we are. Even at the end of the year, people think of making donations to different organizations and they may not think of Sportsmen because we're a tennis club. But the reality is, as I say, we provide educational programs and social service programs that are free. So we really are reliant upon financial support, but we're also reliant upon skilled volunteers. So we have marketing projects, we have IT projects, we have financial management projects. So, anytime that somebody wants to bring their skill set in and help us organizationally, we appreciate that. When we get back to normal, our social programs, we always have speakers come in and talk to our kids about their profession. How did they choose that profession? What did they have to study? You know, what are the benefits of it? So there are mentoring opportunities that are sort of a one-off. You can come in one time and do a presentation on what it takes to be an accountant, or you can become a regular mentor in the girls program or the boys program, where you may come in once a month or more and just sort of be there with the kids. Or there might be one child that you find that you'd like to, you know, almost become like a big brother or big sister, but through the tennis organization, where maybe you're hitting with them, or maybe you're sponsoring that child to play tournaments, or, you know, maybe you're helping them on a regular basis by just reading with them. So there are all kinds of ways. And I always say that we have probably the most volunteer opportunities that you can imagine, because we are so broad in what we do. So we'd love to hear from people. There's information on our website, sportsmanstennis.org, and we would just simply love to connect with people.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we'll definitely post some links and make sure people can interact and find you in your organization. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
I would simply say again, I thank you for this opportunity, both to support you in your efforts to be great citizens in the community, and also to recognize Dr. King and the holiday, and just for giving us the opportunity to talk about what we do, and again, to sort of find that beloved community between our organizations.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, there's a great amount of gratitude on our end, and we do hope that we can have you in person at our campus in the near future. And thank you very much.
Thank you. It'd be my pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.